May 13th, 1943. Morton's Pawn and Loan on Maple Street, Portland, Oregon. Cordelia May Hutchins raised the jeweler's loupe to the light and felt her breath catch. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear blood rushing in her ears. A pair of gold filigree earrings lay on her palm, and every curl, every tiny bead was familiar. She had seen these earrings 5 years ago. They had been brought in by a woman named Beatrice Lowell Whitmore, a living, breathing woman with her own identification, her own signature in the ledger. And then, Beatrice vanished, simply ceased to exist, as if she'd been erased from reality. Now, these earrings had been brought in by a man with nicotine-stained fingers who called himself Vernon Whitmore and presented, without batting an eye, a certificate of ownership. In her 18 years working at the pawn shop, Cordelia had developed a peculiar memory for objects. It wasn't just professional habit. Every ring, every watch, every brooch told a story. A young woman would pawn her mother's wedding band to buy a bus ticket to San Francisco. An old man would bring in his dead son's purple heart because he couldn't afford bread. A middle-aged woman would surrender a silver cigarette case with initials, and Cordelia knew the husband would never return from his business trip. Objects didn't lie. People lied, but objects stayed silent and preserved truth. These earrings were screaming. Vernon Whitmore stood before the counter watching her with a heavy gaze. He was about 47, a burly man with a reddened face and mechanic's hands. On his right palm was an old scar, a white stripe across the calluses. His suit was well made but wrinkled, smelling of tobacco and something else Cordelia couldn't identify. The smell of stale air, closed rooms, basements. "What'll you give me?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. Cordelia placed the earrings on the velvet pad. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she forced herself to maintain professional composure. "Fine craftsmanship," she said slowly. "Pre-war workmanship. They don't make filigree like this anymore. Where did you get these?" "Family heirloom," Vernon answered without hesitation. "From my mother." A lie. Cordelia knew it. A mother would have pawned them herself or sent them through a daughter. Men brought their mother's jewelry only after death, and they came with downcast eyes, grief on their faces. This man looked straight at her with a hint of challenge, as if testing whether she'd believe him. "You have documentation of ownership," Cordelia said, examining the papers. The stamp was genuine, the signature of notary Harrison Fletcher, whom she knew personally. Everything was correct. Everything was legal. And everything was false. Because 5 years ago, on August 17th, 1938, these same earrings had been brought in by Beatrice Lowell Whitmore. Cordelia remembered the woman clearly. 34 years old, thin, with nervous hands. She spoke with a Georgia accent. She needed money until the first of the month, promised to redeem them for certain. The earrings were her only valuables, she said, a gift from her grandmother. Cordelia had given her a good price that day, more than protocol allowed, because she could see the woman was on the edge. On her left cheekbone, something like an old bruise showed through powder. Beatrice never returned. After 3 months, the redemption period expired, and by law, the earrings became property of the pawn shop. Cordelia sold them to a private buyer in spring 1939. The record remained in the ledger. Buyer, 1 Vernon Whitmore. Address, 412 Hawthorne Avenue, Apartment 2B. Whitmore. The same surname. Cordelia felt her mouth go dry. $30, she said, naming the standard price. Agreed? Make it 40, he squinted. You said yourself it's pre-war work. 35. Final offer. He nodded, took the money, signed the ledger, and left. Cordelia watched him through the dusty window. Vernon walked down Maple Street without looking back, with the confident stride of a man who'd never feared anything. When the door closed behind him, Cordelia retrieved the old ledgers from the safe. Records were kept meticulously, every transaction documented. August 1938. There it was. ___, quote __11___. And here was the sale record. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 12, underscore, underscore. Vernon Whitmore had bought back his wife's earrings 8 months after she'd pawned them and disappeared. Cordelia closed the ledger. The room was stuffy despite it being only May. Through the window she could see elm trees, and between the leaves the bright Oregon sunlight pushed through. People walked by on the street, delivery trucks passed, streetcars rumbled. An ordinary Portland day. And in her hands lay earrings that had witnessed something they shouldn't have witnessed. What had happened to Beatrice Lowell Whitmore? Why had she pawned her only valuable possession and never returned? And why had her husband, after buying the earrings back, brought them to the pawn shop again 4 years later? Cordelia May Hutchins was born in Portland in 1905, the year of the Lewis and Clark Exposition. Her father worked for the railroad. Her mother took in sewing. They gave their daughter an education, sent her to business school. At 20, she got a position as a clerk at Morton's Pawn and Loan, and worked there her entire adult life. The Depression had been hard, but the pawn shop survived. Her husband had died in a car accident in 1935, no children. All that remained were objects, other people's stories, and perfect memory for details. That evening when the shop closed, Cordelia walked to Hawthorne Avenue. From downtown, it was about 20 minutes on foot, through neighborhoods where Victorian houses crowded together and the air smelled of coal smoke and dinner cooking. Number 412 turned out to be a 3-story building constructed before the Great War, with peeling paint and a wooden porch. Apartment 2B was on the 2nd floor. Cordelia didn't plan to knock. She just wanted to look, to understand. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, dark green, old-fashioned. Behind the glass there was no light, though the sun hadn't set yet. The door was solid oak with a new lock. "You looking for the Whitmores?" a voice asked from the side. Cordelia turned. On a bench under an old maple tree sat an elderly woman in a flowered housecoat, wrinkled face, sharp eyes. A neighbor, the kind who knows everyone's business. Cordelia smiled. The woman shook her head. Cordelia's heart clenched. "When was this?" "Long time ago now. 5 years, maybe. In 38. I remember because that's when my grandson was born. B was kind, helped me with the baby. Then she disappeared. Vernon says he got a letter from her, that she went to Atlanta, to her brother. But I never saw any letter. And all her things stayed behind. I can see their windows from mine. After she left, he changed the curtains, hung those green ones. Used to be white lace." "Did anyone call the police?" The woman snorted. "One neighbor did, fellow named Garrison, worried about where the woman went. A detective came, talked to Vernon. He showed some letters, some document. Everything legal, he said. They divorced and the wife left. Detective left, never came back. Garrison moved out a month later. Scared, they said. Though I don't know what there was to be scared of." Cordelia thanked her and walked away. On the way back, she thought about Beatrice, about that thin woman with the bruise on her cheekbone, about how she'd pawned the earrings, the only thing she had, about how she never returned for them. And Vernon had redeemed them 8 months later. Why had he waited 8 months? Because he waited for the redemption period to expire and the earrings to become pawn shop property. Then he could buy them legally, raising no questions. Wife pawned them, wife disappeared, husband reclaimed her belongings. All logical, all proper. And now, 4 years later, he'd sold them again. Why? The next day, Cordelia arrived at work earlier than usual. She pulled out all the ledgers from the past decade and began reviewing the entries. She was searching for the name Whitmore, any transactions, any traces. She found 5 more entries. June 1939. V. Whitmore. Pawn silver pocket watch with engraving BL 1932. Loan amount, $15. A watch with the initials BL, Beatrice Lowell. Never redeemed. September 1939. V. Whitmore. Pawned gold wedding band. Loan amount $8. Never redeemed. November 1939. V. Whitmore. Pawned woman's fur collar. Loan amount $12. Never redeemed. January 1940. V. Whitmore. Pawned pearl necklace. Loan amount $25. Never redeemed. March 1940. V. Whitmore. Pawned woman's winter coat, camel hair. Loan amount $18. Never redeemed. All of Beatrice's possessions. Her jewelry. Her clothes. Vernon had methodically brought them all to the pawn shop over the course of a year. Taken out small loans, never repaid them. Let everything become pawn shop property. Bought back what he wanted, sold what he didn't need. Why keep the earrings for 4 years and only now bring them back? Cordelia sat in the dim office staring at the ledger entries. Outside, rain began to fall, typical Portland spring rain, steady and gray. The street glistened with water. People hurried past with umbrellas. War news dominated every conversation, every newspaper headline. The Pacific Campaign, North Africa, casualty lists. The world was at war. And here in Portland, people pawned their possessions to buy war bonds, to support families with men overseas, to survive rationing. And Vernon Whitmore pawned his dead wife's jewelry. Cordelia closed the ledger and picked up the telephone. She dialed the number for the Portland Police Bureau, asked for Detective Raymond Dunbar, whom she'd known for years. He'd bought his wife's engagement ring from the pawn shop back in 1936, came by sometimes to chat. Ray? It's Cordelia Hutchins at Morton's. I need to talk to you about something. Can you come by? What's this about, Cordy? A murder, I think, from 5 years ago. Detective Raymond Dunbar was 52, a stocky man with graying hair and tired eyes. He'd been with the Portland police for 30 years, worked homicide for the last 15. He arrived at the pawn shop an hour after Cordelia's call, his raincoat dripping water. Tell me, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Cordelia laid out the earrings, opened the ledgers, showed him the entries, explained about Beatrice Whitmore, about the systematic pawning of all her possessions, about Vernon's return 4 years later. Ray listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat silent for a long moment. Ray rubbed his face. Ray stood, took his hat. Ray stood. Cordelia caught his arm. Ray looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Ray returned 3 days later. He looked grim. He said. Ray pulled out a folded paper. Cordelia unfolded it. The letter was brief, written in neat cursive. Ray asked. Cordelia studied the letter carefully. The handwriting was feminine, the spelling correct. But something felt wrong. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 52, underscore, underscore. Ray nodded. Cordelia opened the 1938 ledger, found Beatrice's signature from when she'd pawned the earrings, compared it to the letter. Quote, 53, quote, Cordelia said, pointing. Quote, 54, quote, quote, 55, quote, quote, 56, quote. Ray's expression hardened. You're sure? I'm certain. She had no brother. So the letter's a forgery. Or Vernon forced her to write it before he killed her, dictated what to say. Ray stood abruptly. I'm bringing Vernon in for questioning. This is enough to reopen the case. Be careful, Ray. I will. And Cordy, thank you. If you hadn't remembered those earrings, this would have stayed buried forever. Vernon Whitmore was arrested on May 18, 1943. Ray and 2 other detectives brought him in for questioning. He denied everything at first, maintained that Beatrice had left voluntarily, that he'd done nothing wrong. But when Ray showed him the handwriting analysis, the inconsistencies in the letter, Vernon's story began to crack. She was going to leave me, he finally said. Going to take everything, ruin my reputation. I couldn't let her do that. So you killed her. It was an accident. We fought. She fell, hit her head. I panicked. Where's the body, Vernon? Silence. Where did you put her? More silence. Vernon hired a lawyer, stopped talking. But Ray kept digging. He searched the apartment on Hawthorne Avenue, found Beatrice's belongings still boxed in a closet. Old dresses, shoes, photographs, everything she would have taken if she'd really left for Atlanta. He interviewed neighbors, got statements about Vernon's temper, about fights heard through the walls. About a particular night in August 1938 when there'd been shouting, then sudden quiet, then Vernon's car leaving at 3 a.m. He checked property records, found that Vernon's family owned land outside Portland, near Gresham. 40 acres of wooded property, isolated, remote. On June 2, 1943, police dogs found human remains buried in a shallow grave on that property. Dental records confirmed it was Beatrice Lowell Whitmore. She'd been dead 5 years. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull, multiple fractures. Not an accident. Murder. Vernon was charged with first-degree murder. Trial began in September. The prosecution presented the evidence, the forged letter, the pawned belongings, the buried body. Cordelia testified about the earrings, about her memory of Beatrice's signature, about the systematic disposal of possessions. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty. Vernon Whitmore was sentenced to death. He hanged at Oregon State Penitentiary on February 14, 1944. After the trial, Ray came to see Cordelia at the pawn shop. "We did it," he said. "Justice for Beatrice." "It took 5 years," Cordelia said quietly. 5 years for anyone to care that she was gone. People disappear all the time, especially women. They leave bad marriages, go to other cities, start over. How's anyone supposed to know the difference between that and murder? By paying attention, Cordelia said. By remembering. By noticing when things don't add up. Ray looked at her thoughtfully. You said something before about other women. Women with bruises who pawn their belongings and sometimes don't come back. Were you serious? Completely serious. How many? I don't keep count, but over the years, dozens, maybe more. Can you identify them? Give me names, dates? Cordelia hesitated. Some of them came back. They're alive. They got away. I don't want to drag them into investigations, force them to relive trauma. I'm not asking you to hurt them, Cordy. I'm asking if there are others like Beatrice, women who disappeared and no one noticed. Let me look through the records. I'll see what I can find. That night, Cordelia stayed late at the pawn shop, going through years of ledgers. She made lists, careful notes. Women who'd pawned wedding rings and never returned. Women who'd pawned everything they owned in a single transaction. Women whose husbands or boyfriends later came in pawning feminine items. She found 12 cases that raised red flags. Some could be explained innocently. Women who'd left town, women who died of natural causes, women whose possessions were legitimately sold by surviving family. But 3 cases looked suspicious. Case 1, Margaret Ann Cordell, 1936. She'd pawned a garnet necklace and silver bracelet in July, never redeemed them. Her husband Harold came in 4 months later, pawned her winter coat and handbag. Said she'd moved to Seattle to care for a sick aunt. But when Cordelia checked, she found Harold had pawned 8 more items over the next year. All women's belongings. Too many items, too systematically dispersed. Case 2, Iris Delaney, 1940. Pawned her wedding ring in March. Never came back. Her husband Roger showed up 6 months later with a fur stole and diamond earrings, claimed he was settling his deceased wife's estate. But there was no obituary, no death certificate on file at City Hall. Iris had simply vanished. Case 3, Dorothy Ruth Kensington, 1941. Pawned a cameo brooch in June. Disappeared. Her fiancé, Luther Kensington, married someone else 3 months later. Brought in Dorothy's jewelry collection the following year. Said he was cleaning out storage. Cordelia presented these cases to Ray. He investigated. 2 led nowhere. Margaret Cordell was found alive in Sacramento, having left an abusive marriage. Dorothy Kensington had died in a sanitarium of tuberculosis, her death poorly documented due to wartime bureaucracy. But Iris Delaney's case was different. Her husband Roger couldn't account for where she'd gone. Said she'd been depressed, might have run off or hurt herself. Police searched the Delaney property, found nothing. But Ray kept digging, and eventually a witness came forward. A former neighbor who'd heard terrible fights, who'd seen Roger dragging something heavy to his car one night. Roger Delaney was arrested, questioned, broke down and confessed. Iris's body was found in the Columbia River Gorge. He was convicted of manslaughter, sentenced to 20 years. 2 murders. 2 killers. All because Cordelia remembered jewelry. Word spread. Other pawnbrokers called, asked Cordelia how she did it, how she remembered, how she knew. "I just pay attention," she told them. "Look at the person, not just the item. Notice the bruises, the fear. And when you see something that doesn't fit, don't ignore it." Some listened. Some didn't. But slowly, a network formed. Pawnbrokers across Portland, then across Oregon, started keeping better records, watching for patterns, reporting suspicious cases. And Cordelia started doing something else. When women came in with bruises, with scared eyes, pawning their last possessions, Cordelia didn't just take the items and give them money. She talked to them. Quietly, privately, asked if they were safe, offered help. She kept a list of addresses, women's shelters, church groups that helped families in crisis, lawyers who worked pro bono. She had phone numbers memorized, contacts at social services, train schedules for cities across the country. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 87, underscore, underscore, she would say. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 88, underscore, underscore. Most women refused. Too scared, too ashamed, too convinced they had no options. But some listened. Some took the addresses, the phone numbers. Some came back a week later, a month later, asking for help. Cordelia helped them. Gave them money beyond what their pawned items were worth. Wrote letters of reference for new jobs. Made phone calls to her contacts in other cities. Helped them disappear legally, safely. She didn't keep count, didn't track statistics. She just helped when she saw someone needed help. The war ended in 1945. Men came home. The economy boomed. Portland grew, changed. But the pawn shop remained, and Cordelia remained, and women kept coming with their last possessions and their desperate eyes. In 1947, a young woman named Stella Rowland came in with an infant son and a purple bruise under her left eye. She wanted to pawn a gold locket, her mother's, the only thing of value she owned. "How much can you give me?" she asked. "I need bus fare to Salem. My husband, he's—" She stopped, looked down. "I need to leave. Tonight." Cordelia examined the locket, worth maybe $12. She gave Stella $40. "This is too much," Stella protested. "Take it. Here's an address in Salem, a women's boarding house. Tell them Cordelia sent you. They'll help you find work, a place to stay. Don't go back to your husband." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. You have to. For your son. Go now, before you change your mind." Stella took the money, the address. Left. Cordelia never saw her again. Never knew if she made it to Salem, if she stayed gone. But 3 years later, in 1950, Stella returned. She was healthy, confident, smiling. Her son was 3, happy and well-fed. "I came to pay you back," Stella said, putting $40 on the counter. "I got a job in Salem at a canning factory. Saved money. Met a good man, remarried. We're happy. My boy's safe. And it's all because you helped me when no one else would." "You don't have to pay me back," Cordelia said. "I know. But I wanted you to know. What you did mattered. You saved our lives. After Stella left, Cordelia sat alone in the shop and cried. Not sad tears, grateful tears. Because it worked. Sometimes it actually worked. In 1952, Ray Dunbar retired from the police force. He came to see Cordelia on his last day. 35 years, he said. I've seen a lot, solved a lot of cases. But you know what I'll remember most? Beatrice Whitmore, the earrings you recognized. How one woman's memory for objects brought a killer to justice. It wasn't just me, Cordelia said. You did the investigation. You gave me the thread. I just pulled it. Ray paused. How many women have you helped, Cordy, over the years? How many have you sent to shelters, given money to, helped disappear? I don't count. Ballpark. Maybe 50. Maybe more. I don't know how many actually left, how many stayed safe. 50 lives. That's more than most cops save in a career. I'm not a cop. No. You're something better. You're someone who notices, someone who cares, someone who acts. Ray put on his hat. Thank you, Cordelia, for everything. Years passed. The 50s became the 60s. Cordelia grew older. Her hair grayed, her hands developed arthritis. But her memory remained sharp. She still recognized every item, remembered every face. In 1963, a woman named Laura came in. She was in her 40s, well-dressed, composed. She wanted to donate an item to the pawnshop's charitable fund, a pair of gold filigree earrings. Cordelia took the earrings, examined them. They weren't the same ones Beatrice had pawned, but the style was similar, the craftsmanship. Why these? Cordelia asked. Laura smiled sadly. 20 years ago, I came into this shop. I was young, scared, broke. I wanted to pawn my mother's earrings. You gave me money, more than they were worth. You gave me an address, a phone number, told me I could leave, that I didn't have to stay with the man who was hurting me. I didn't listen. I was too afraid. I went back to him. What happened? He put me in the hospital 3 times over the next 2 years. Finally, the 4th time, I remembered what you said. I left, took nothing but my son, went to that address you gave me, the women's shelter on Morrison Street. They helped me get on my feet. I started over, raised my boy alone. He's in college now, studying engineering. And I wanted you to know, even though I didn't listen right away, you planted a seed. And eventually that seed grew. You saved my life. So these earrings, they're my way of saying thank you. Maybe they'll help someone else. Cordelia took the earrings, placed them carefully in the display case. They will, I promise. In 1968, Cordelia turned 63. The pawnshop had new owners now. Morton's sons had taken over when the old man died. But they kept Cordelia on, valued her knowledge, her memory, her rapport with customers. One afternoon in November, a young detective came in. She was maybe 30, with short dark hair and a professional manner. Cordelia considered. Sharon leaned forward. Over the next 5 years, Cordelia consulted on 18 cases. Most led nowhere. But 3 resulted in arrests. 3 killers were identified, charged, convicted. 3 families got closure. And through it all, Cordelia kept working at the pawn shop, kept watching for frightened women, kept offering help. In 1973, Cordelia retired. She was 68. Her arthritis made it hard to hold the jeweler's loupe steady. The owners threw her a party, gave her a gold watch, thanked her for 48 years of service. "What will you do now?" they asked. "Rest," she said. "Read. Garden." But Cordelia didn't rest. She volunteered at the women's shelter on Morrison Street, the same one she'd been sending women to for decades. She helped with intake, talked to new arrivals, offered the wisdom of someone who'd seen hundreds of women in crisis. You can start over, she would tell them. It's hard, but it's possible. I've seen it happen. I've helped make it happen. She also wrote letters to lawmakers, to judges, to district attorneys, arguing for better protections for abuse victims, better resources, better laws. We need safe houses, she wrote. We need legal aid. We need a system that protects women before they're murdered, not just prosecutes the killers afterward. Some listened. Oregon passed new domestic violence laws in 1977. Funding for shelters increased. Police training improved. It wasn't enough. It never was enough. But it was progress. In 1982, Cordelia was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The doctors said she had maybe a year. She was 77. Women came to visit, dozens of them. Women Cordelia had helped over the decades. They came with their children, their grandchildren. They told stories, story after story, woman after woman. A parade of lives saved, children protected, futures preserved. Cordelia listened, held their hands, smiled. Quote, 137, quote, she said. Quote, 138, quote. Cordelia May Hutchins died on March 7, 1983. She was buried at Riverview Cemetery, overlooking the Willamette River. Over 200 people attended her funeral. A woman named Stella, the same Stella who'd come in with an infant and a black eye in 1947, gave the eulogy. Cordelia didn't just run a pawn shop, Stella said. She ran a rescue operation. For 48 years, she stood behind that counter and watched for women in trouble. When she saw us, bruised, scared, desperate, she didn't look away. She helped. She gave us money, addresses, phone numbers. She gave us hope. She gave us permission to save ourselves. The police say she helped solve at least 8 murders. But the real number is higher. Because she prevented murders. She saved women before they were killed. And those women went on to live full lives, raise children, build careers. We're all here because of her. Hundreds of us, maybe thousands counting our children and grandchildren. We're Cordelia's legacy. We're the lives she saved. Epilogue. Portland, 2018. The Oregon Historical Society opened an exhibit called Hidden Heroines, Women Who Changed Oregon. Among the displays was a photograph of Cordelia May Hutchins, a serious woman in a dark dress, with careful eyes and capable hands. The caption read, Cordelia May Hutchins, 1905 to 1983, pawnbroker and advocate. For 48 years, Hutchins worked at Morton's Pawn and Loan on Maple Street. She used her exceptional memory to help solve multiple murders, including the landmark Whitmore case in 1943. More significantly, she helped hundreds of domestic violence victims escape abusive situations, providing money, resources, and support. Her advocacy contributed to Oregon's domestic violence protection laws passed in the 1970s. Estimated lives saved, 300 plus. Next to the photograph was a display case. Inside lay a pair of gold filigree earrings, not Beatrice's original earrings. Those had been lost to time. But earrings like them, donated by one of the women Cordelia had helped. Visitors stopped at the display, read the placard, looked at the earrings. Some took photos. Some stood quietly. One visitor, a woman in her 50s, stood for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone and called someone. __quote _143 __. The earrings lay under glass, silent witnesses. They couldn't speak, but if they could, they would say, remember us. Remember Beatrice. Remember Cordelia. Remember all the women who didn't escape in time, and help the ones who still can. Don't wait. Leave now, while you're still alive. Because one moment of attention, one act of kindness, one person who notices and cares can change everything, can save a life, can stop a killer, can be the difference between death and survival. That's what Cordelia understood. That's what she taught. That's what her legacy means. Pay attention, care, act. It's that simple. It's that hard. It's that necessary. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, you'll help someone like Stella. Someone who'll remember you 60 years later, standing at your grave, crying grateful tears because you saw her when she was invisible to everyone else. Because you gave her a chance when no one else would. Because you helped her save herself. That's what Cordelia did. 300 times, maybe more. 300 women, 300 lives, 300 futures that wouldn't have existed without one careful pawnbroker who paid attention to objects and to the people who brought them in. The earrings remain in their case, a symbol, a reminder, a call to action. See the bruises, notice the fear, offer the help. Don't wait for permission. Don't look away. Do something. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. That's what Cordelia would want you to remember.